a channel where we question everything. Today's topic is bits and pieces. I actually wanted to make a video on why I disagree with the Duran again, but I'm not going to do that because I don't see the I don't see the need for doing that. But what I would like to discuss is the current political situation in Britain and in France and the upcoming midterm election in America. Well, this is going to be the final saying about the mess that is currently happening in Britain. We all should know by now that Liz Truss has resigned. And according to Alexander Mercurius, it was a coup d'etat that was executed by a cabal of remainders in Britain. And basically that is the reason why Liz Truss was forced to resign. And the objective is to get Keir Starmer from the Labour Party into power. Now, I'm not an expert on British politics. I do watch the news. I do read some articles. And I have some idea what's going on. But that's not what we really want to discuss. What I would like to ask yourself, which I have done in a previous video, is that the whole system doesn't make sense. You had Boris Johnson as a prime minister. He was disposed of because he couldn't be trusted anymore. Well, Boris, you could have never trusted from the beginning, so it's nothing new that they actually said, but they forced him out of his position based on the parties that he kept during the COVID lockdowns. While he forced the whole British population to stay at home, he was keeping parties and so on and so on, and then he lied about that. And then his whole personality of lying became exposed and he had to get rid of. And then we had a new leadership in a Conservative Party. And, there were, how many candidates? I believe about 8. And from these 8, Jeremy Hunt got the last position. He was one of the first ones out. And then we went through the process, and then Sunak and Liz Truss remained as the final candidates. And then members of the Conservative Party then elected Liz Truss. Now, I'm not a supporter of Liz Truss. I've always thought that she's going to be disastrous to Britain. And I could never understand why anybody would really vote for her. And when I was actually shocked when they did announce the final prime minister. But what Liz has done is she has always advocated what she's going to do, what the policies are. So when the people voted, or the parliament members or the MPs put her and Sunak as the final candidates to their members, they knew precisely what she's going to do and how she's going to react. So they are co-responsible for her final mini budget that she has produced. But according to some pundits, it's one of the trademarks of the Conservative Party is that they bring out the long knives and stab the leaders in the back. That's not a very nice thing to say, but according to the experts, that is how the Conservative Party functions. In any case, in my opinion, and that is why I differ from Alexander, I don't believe it was a fair, a coup d'etat. Liz Truss basically instructed the mini budget, and it was trickle-down economics. And that is what the mini budget was all about. There were tax increases, which were basically unfunded, and that spooked the markets. And then the Bank of England had no choice but to intervene. They had to react and buy up some of their bonds that they were dropping. And yes, there was a announcement that the pension fund should react by a certain date, otherwise they will lose a lot of money, because then the Bank of England will stop the buying back of the bonds. Now, one has to look at the financial system per se. There is a central bank, in this case the Bank of England, and then there are investors, financial experts that manage the funds of pension funds, and insurance companies and banks and so forth. Out of these two, the Bank of England and the financial system, let's call all these other guys the financial investors, there is constantly a sort of opposing forces. The financial sector wants to make money, and the Bank of England, the Reserve Bank, has to control so that these financial system managers don't manipulate the stock exchange and bonds and so forth. From these two parties, they constantly have a battle between them. And the problem with this thing is, or one of the features of these, is that the financial sector cannot make any losses. So they are in a certain sense vulnerable, and they have limited funds. On the other side, the Reserve Bank has unlimited funds because it can print money, and therefore it's a game of chicken. But the Reserve Bank, the Bank of England, has the most power in that respect because of its unlimited funds. And therefore, whatever threat the Bank of England makes, the Reserve Bank, the financial sector will take that in account, and they will not, they will rather retreat. And when the Bank of England made this announcement that by the end of that Friday, the pension fund should withdraw, the financial sector realized this is not going to cut it. They're not going to compete against the Reserve Bank because they cannot do that. And they will rather take their losses at that stage. But the pound has in any case increased in value, so there was some positive signs. And that is why the statement was made by the Reserve Bank. You can look at the statements also made by the American Reserve Bank, and how they manipulate the market by threatening them or making certain statements. And this is, like I said, a game of chicken. But the Reserve Bank is always stronger than the financial markets, or in any case, most of the time. So the reaction of the English bank was not, in my opinion, a coup d'etat, as Alexander actually tries to say, but it had more or less the same effect. What created is that the pound fell initially due to Liz Truss's mini budget, and then her supporters realized, but whoa, this is not what we expected, and they started to backtrack and force her into position. Now, again, I don't understand how the political system works. According to me, the Prime Minister is the head of the party, and is the Prime Minister appointed by the King, the Queen in this case, before she passed away. And therefore, she is the ultimate leader. And then her MPs should follow her. But it doesn't look like this has happened. It looked like she was forced to retract the mini budget, and she was forced to appoint Jeremy Hunt as a new Chancellor. And Jeremy Hunt then went and cancelled most of her budget items, especially the tax cuts and so forth, and energy support packages. So the party went against their own leader. And that should say you something about the political system in Britain. In any case, it was clear it was a matter of time that for her to resign. Why? Well, her own members were backstabbing her with the long knives, as they have said. And so if you don't have the support of your members, then, well, what can you do? You can only resign. But in fairness, in my opinion, is that when the British population voted for their government, they voted for a party and they voted for a prime minister. And if this party leader, prime minister, has to resign, then from an ethical point of view and from a point of democracy, then there should be held new elections. Because clearly the party is not performing as it should have done, as selected by the population during the election. But let's see if that will happen. Then you move now according to Alexander, the whole political system is in chaos, and the political elite don't know what they're doing. They're fighting in between them and decide who is going to be the next prime minister. Well, if there's a coup d'etat, then the purpose was to get rid of Liz Truss, and then there should have been a plan B. That if she leaves, then there should have been at least some form of goal, or at least a candidate that should have replaced her. Now, there's even talk about Boris Johnson coming back, but I don't think I have to agree with Alexander. That's a no-no. That would totally destroy the Conservative Party. If they appoint Sunak, I believe the British are too racist to really put him into that position. But if he is selected as a prime minister, he's supposed to be a billionaire and a financial expert. And Jeremy Hunt has now taken over. So how are those two people going to gel? Is Sunak then going to get rid of Jeremy Hunt or not? That we have to see, and I don't really understand it again. It just doesn't make sense for me in no ways. You know, from a South African sitting here in South Africa, the British Empire, where the sun never sets, has deteriorated in a circus. Similar to American politics, where first Trump was elected and now a senile old man, Joe Biden, who mostly forgets on what he's doing. So the powers, America is still the power in the West, and Britain is basically its lapdog. And it seems to me Europe is also going to get drawn into this very, very subversion. Come on, English name. Docile, no, not docile, but you get the picture. He will serve the Americans. Come on, you're going to make up your own word for that. Subservient. Yeah, I think that's the right word. And, well, what Alexander then mentioned actually is that Wallace went to America to speak to the White House. And they talked about the timing of his visit, and that he didn't want to talk by telephone with any other of the other party leaders and members, because for some or other reason it might be insecure and the Russians might listen to it. Well, later on, Wallace said in any case, he's not going to be a candidate for the Prime Minister. And Jeremy Hunt also said that he won't be running for that post. But what Alex Turner should really have asked is, why did Wallace go to America at this stage of the game? And I don't think that Wallace went there for the political shambles that's occurring in England. He went there as the Minister of Defense. And there's something cooking from the military point of view. But I will address that in another video. And basically the conclusion made by the Duran and Alexander was that the whole political system in Britain is totally in panic mode. They are in shambles. They don't know what to do. And they have no proper candidate. And there's a lot of infighting going on. So basically, Britain sits now without a proper government in a time of crisis. Now, I don't believe that either Liz Truss, even if she was a good Prime Minister, could have solved the problems. And the new Prime Minister has all my sympathies of trying to resolve the problems in Britain. Britain, just like the Euro, the Eurozone, just like America, is experiencing high inflation and high energy cost. And it seems to me that there is no real solution to resolve it, unless they want to print money. And if they want to print money, they have to print a lot of them. And then we have the proverbial Weimar runaway inflation, and the Weimar Republic, and the crash of the pound, and maybe the crash of the euro, and maybe the crash of the American dollar. So I don't see any simple solution to the problem. Yes, they talk about lifting the sanctions, and I don't agree with that. The problems have started already last year, and is mostly due to the actions on the money printing that went on during the COVID lockdowns. That is where it all started. No, it didn't really start there. It actually started in 2008, when there was a financial crisis, and the reserve banks and the government refuses to tackle that crash properly, and started to print money in terms of QE, and kick the can down the road. And then for basically 5 years, they could have done it, and then COVID struck, and then more money was required, and they printed a lot more money. And that was one of the factors that started. And the other factor would have been the supply chain problems that were developed. And only now, well, there's a lot more other factors. Like I said in my previous videos, also the change of pricing gas in long-term contracts onto a spot market, and et cetera, and other financial things that they did. There were the refusal of the so-called South to support the West, the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. Well, like I said, there's a lot of factors that can influence it. But it all started with COVID and the money printing during the COVID period, and the subsequent supply chain problems, which is still being experienced because China still has a zero policy of COVID. And it does influence their exports, and the growth in the Chinese economy is estimated to be below 5% due to those policies. So as you can see, a lot of things are interlinked and so on. So this, by lifting the sanctions, is not going to solve the problem. It might alleviate the problem a little bit. But they are running down, the European Western world is running downhill, and it's going to be very difficult to stop this. Because if you look at the response of the American Reserve Bank, and you look at the response of Bank of England and even Europe, they are not increasing the interest rates fast enough, high enough, in order to stop the inflation. I mean, if you cannot stop inflation by increasing the interest rate to 3% or 4% or even 5% when the real interest rate, real inflation is more than 10%. It doesn't work like that. And if you have a shortage of goods, which is now due to the supply chains and the sanctions against America, so you have now a limited quantities, and we all know the basic principles of economy, supply and demand. So the supply is low, the demand might be normal. That's inflation. That's how it goes. And then I don't really understand stagflation and deflation. Right? At the end of the day, prices fall. I don't know. You can look up at that yourself. That's not what I wanted to really talk about. That. And basically, that's the conclusion where the Durand stops with the analysis. But one has to look a little bit further. Early next month, we're going to have the midterm elections in America. And what is going to happen there? Now, the American elections are usually fought on domestic problems or on domestic issues, like abortions or something like that, or medical aid or medical care and stuff like that. It's never fought on foreign policy. And well, we all know by now that Americans have a very limited knowledge about the world and where countries are. They are not just taught like that. They don't have the interest in any case. I mean, how many Americans really knew where Ukraine was before they started with this whole war and this propaganda? Very few. And I still believe there are still a lot of few. There was a study done, and just for indices, which actually makes me laugh, is that they asked, what is the most important issue for the Americans? And the number one issue was crime. Now, me here in South Africa is laughing at them. If they want to know, or if Americans want to experience crime, come and visit South Africa, then you know what is crime. But that's beside the point. Ukraine was very, very low on the list. Because most people don't care about that. And domestic politics are usually fought on that. Typically, like Americans always lie, once they are in power, then we as in the international community then starts to see more the foreign policies of the Americans. And it's again a lot of complex issues, and I have discussed it in other videos as well, how the Americans actually being subsidized by the world, their living styles and so forth. And I'm not going to go into that stuff again. The point here is that it doesn't matter whether the Republicans or Democrats are in power. They will fund Ukraine. And just for indication's sakes, according to, well, the numbers are so changing day by day, and you don't always know if it's a drawdown or whether it's a new budget or if it's the same budget just being discussed again. But let's call it some thumbsuck figures that I've heard and so on. Let's assume America has financed Ukraine with $17 billion worth of armaments. 17. But according to the other number, the Americans have allocated nearly $80 billion to the Ukrainian conflict. But Ukraine didn't receive all that money. It received, it said, $63 billion in supposed to be funding. Didn't receive $63 billion. So where did this money go? It went to replacement of military. It went to American expenditures inside America. And if you look at that, then you start, it's a money laundering type of thing. It's kickbacks. It's spending the money on their political supporters. That's what the American government is really doing. Yes, they did supply some other money for the Ukrainian government in order to prop them up, and one can understand it. But the bulk of that money allocated to Ukraine is not going to Ukraine, it's staying in America. It's payback time. And then to another video that Duran, no, was it Duran that said that? Yeah, it was. Is that before the election, midterm election, the government wants to quickly push through a 50 billion, another 50 billion package that must go to Ukraine, and that will service Ukraine for the next year until the end of 2023. And they actually talked about it, that is way too little. No, it's not too little. If Ukraine gets all the money. But that's the debatable point. The point here is that America gives 50 billion on top of all the other money it gets, and then Europeans have to also add money in terms of loans and so on to prop up the Ukrainian government and pay the salaries of the government and the soldiers and so forth. And then if you look, and Zelensky has always said they need about $5 billion a month, which is way more than I think they really need it. But let's take it then, you know, it's 10 months worth of support if all the money goes to Ukraine. And if the Europeans are also giving a percentage of those funds, then yes, it will last until 2023. But the question is, will Ukraine last until then? And I highly doubt about that. The military situation in Ukraine is now going to change. Winter is coming, but I don't think that's going to stop the Russians. What the Russians are waiting is to get fully mobilized, get all the equipment into place, get all the logistics into place, and then start with the offense in the direction of either Odessa, but they will start pushing it. And if there's no negotiations, then they will continue. They will continue to the north or wherever there are pro-Russian populations and that want to become part of Russia, and Russia will take over those oblasts. But anyway, so that is more or less the one side of the politics. Alexandra did talk about the French, but I also disagree again with the French, and I will explain. Firstly, the protest action that's currently in France was initialized by the workers of the oil industry, the energy companies. And the main reason why is that the energy companies were making huge profits, and the workers were getting small raises that didn't account for the price of energy. And what they basically were demanding is they want a piece of the pie. Since it's going so well with the companies, and it's going so bad with them, the company can spend a lot more money in order to support them. That is piece of the pie. That is what they wanted. And then naturally some other organizations then hooked onto it and became part of the protest. But the French are renowned for their protest actions. So just, you know, if you go to Italy, they have a time to react and they mobilize. Spain, Germany even takes longer before they even go into the street. But the French are like that. They go into the street for any issue. And the projection is that Macron will use force to subdue these protests and be very authoritarian, and he has said it before. And the fact is he has done it before. But again, the question has to be asked, who voted for him? Wasn't that the French people, the same people that are protesting now? And that happened when? Beginning of the year? Honest? It wasn't like 5 years ago. They had 5 years or 4 years experience of Macron. They had the Yellow Vest movement for a year long. How many people died in the Yellow Vest movement and were injured permanently? And I have a video about that actually, of the numbers. So, and then they went and voted for Macron again. Now, as you can see, I'm not the youngest guy. So I grew up in the apartheid era in South Africa. And at that stage, we always said I was against the National Party. We were all, the people deserve the government that they have elected. That was told, we were talking about that at that stage. And the same here. France deserves the Macron because they voted for him. Same in England. The people of England, of Britain, deserve their government. Nobody should start complaining. You voted for them. So take the punch and take the consequences, because you knew what Macron is going to do. In fact, actually, Macron is not that pro-Ukrainians. I mean, the amount of articles that I read from him are actually very few. And if there is articles, then it's a very lamely stated type of narrative. It's not like that strong like Liz Truss tried to do, or that Baerbock or Olaf Scholz. Moderate would be. Macron is a little bit more moderate in that respect. In any case, that's the story for today. Please subscribe to the channel. Please tell your friends about that and let them come and view. And hopefully we can have a nice discussion. I would like to have some live videos, but unfortunately I can only do it if I have 1,000 subscribers, which we are a long way down. So, like I said, share the videos or the locations, and let's see what we can achieve. Next time. Cheers.